got a lot to talk about. And we're going to spend an awful lot of our time here talking about the ferries and particularly the emergency grant made by the governor way back in mid-fall, I guess, mid-autumn or early autumn. And we want to talk about what the county is doing with that money, that opportunity. But we're going to kind of back up here and get a 30,000-foot view. I want to start by making a couple observations. One is that I think many of us were stunned at the boldness of your and the council's actions in, was it June or July? I can't remember exactly when.
Yeah,
when you simply said, look, we're going to have to go it on our own. We're going to bypass the state legislators and we're going to go straight to the top. And I remember people thinking that's going to be a mistake. It was a giant gamble. It's hard objectively to see it as anything but a success. And I'm gonna let you, because I don't know if the public knows this, I'm going to let you have a little victory lap here. When you opened the check, it wasn't $1 million, was it?
No.
What was it?
It was 1.5 actually. Yeah. And so with a little cherry on top, which is the value of $600,000 worth of investment in WSF to add a third watch to the crew on the Inter-island boat, enabling it to run all throughout the winter, 7 days a week. So in total, 2.1 million, when you add it all up, was the gift, emergency gift provided by a combination of the governor's emergency budget and also emergency funds held in the Department of Commerce for circumstances like these. So what happened was the Department of Commerce runs on a July to June calendar year financially, not calendar year financially. And what Commerce decided to do was to take what was our 6-month ask for funding for some passenger-only ferry service and barge service, et cetera, and built on top of that 3 additional months of funding to take us to June 30th of 2025. So that was in the first call we had with Department of Commerce. They said, look, we have the funds in our emergency allocation for this financial year, July 2024 to June 2025. And they said, let's just run it out through the end of our financial year. So that was in the first call. We couldn't believe it. So we additionally learned around the same time that it was out of the governor's own emergency budget that he would be giving the funds of $600,000 to WSF to augment the Inter-island service, to enable it to run on the weekends as well in the wintertime. And so, I mean, it was even more than we asked for. So it was pretty tremendous.
So, yeah, there's a lot of things that, affirmatively that are going to be happening in 2025 because of this money. There's also something on December 29th of this month that's not going to happen. That's good news. And that is that the winter schedule is not going to, as it always has, or at least in recent years, be cut back in Inter-island, right, on weekends. So
that's right.
That's the $600,000. That's the other part of the big victory, not just the Commerce Department grant, but the continuing. And you have some more good news, I think, about that.
Yeah. So I just want to back up for 1 second, Jeff, and give a shout out to 25 Washington State Ferries workforce task members from our county who've written a new schedule for winter, and it's being launched on the 29th of December. And we're looking forward to feedback from the community if that schedule works for them. The schedules hadn't been updated in 15 years, I think it was approximately. And the workforce or task force members rather have worked on rewriting the schedule for a year and a half now. That's 25 volunteers from our county and also a couple from Anacortes to come up with a new schedule for our ridership. So we look forward to finding out if that schedule is working for everybody. Obviously, they can't be perfect, but that combined with the additional crew on the Inter-island and more frequent running of Inter-island on the weekends, we hope will be really beneficial. So I'm sorry, go back to your other question.
Well, just that on the 29th, old schedule would have had us lose weekend service, and now
Right.
that's not going to happen because just another good outcome. So it's just, as I said before, it's hard to look at the gamble that the council took and the pressure that went all the way back to last October of 23, the famous letters. Um, and it was just quite successful. So now you have $1.5 million to spend by, is it still June 30th, or is that somehow extended to September?
That's the date in the contract now, but indeed, we fully expect we'll need to continue to extend it out. Yeah.
Okay. So why don't we talk now about how that money is going to be spent? I think there's a lot of people that are curious. So let's just get into how the $1.5 million will be spent for emergency service. Why don't we start by saying that as much as some of us would love to see something like an experimental foot ferry to Bellingham, that's not in the cards because that's not the nature of the emergency. That's not something that has been denied us because we never had it, right? So we can't do that, right?
Well, it wasn't included in the proposal that we wrote to the governor. And that you're right, that's not a route that WSF serves, right, between Bellingham and the islands. And so, if there were to be any reopening of the discussion with Department of Commerce as to whether or not we could have any kind of passenger service between Bellingham and the other islands, we could entertain that. But frankly, we haven't even started to implement what we did get money for. So I think that's I think we got to be responsible here in the way in which we ask for the money, the way in which we need to set about implementing, programming that will enable us to utilize those funds. So I think to add another leg to the stool at this point, I would not advise that. It is something that's been, it's come up, but I'd be hesitating to go back to Commerce right now and ask for that when we haven't got things going yet.
Yeah, and it should be noted also that there's been no attempt to unilaterally bring back the Sydney route either. So this is not the time to be creative with bringing back an old route that's currently suspended or creating a new route. This is about particularly, not exclusively, but largely about making sure that the inter-island, our inter-island ability is there when and as you noted, we had a rough weekend with inter-island. So
Yes.
it was just a reminder after a relatively quiet autumn. It was a reminder that the problem is still there. So let's talk about the three programs that that are going to be designed or are being designed as we speak, I guess. The first would be the inter-island water taxi. And this is the service that we're familiar with. It might take a different form now, but let's talk about what that is going to look like, you think?
Well, the early discussions we've had as an internal work group within our county organization is that it would run very similarly to the manner in which Tom Bridge of the Community Water Taxi ran his water taxi service starting back in August of 2023. Obviously, we would need to have it be a more robust service, a service that could carry more individuals. Tom was only able to take a maximum of 6. So we would be contemplating being able to carry more passengers, having that service be more frequent. The idea is that it would run when there are disruptions in our regular ferry service so that people aren't stranded on any of the ferry-served islands. So we've had an initial discussion with the Community Water Taxi Group to gain insights into how that service was run, what were some of the challenges, what opportunities did it present. And so to get a bit of a sense of the workings of that operation. And we've already been contacted by some independent entities that are interested in providing such a service, such a water taxi service. So as I have been learning, there are actually already some foot ferry passenger boats that are on the water serving the different islands that are done on a more private sector basis. So it's pretty costly to take a boat by foot from Anacortes, say, to Decatur or Center Island. And we want to look at how we can run a system like that. First and most importantly, inter-island, particularly when that vessel goes down. But then we're also going to add another leg to the stool, which is piloting 2 times a day service from Anacortes to the ferry-served islands and back. And so, so those are the 2 dimensions of foot ferry service that we're looking at: a taxi service, which does require the dispatch function, right? So we're going to have to work that out. We've had early discussions about that. And then the second is a more regularized piloting of Anacortes to the ferry-served islands and back twice a day to see what kind of demand there is for that.
In both cases, these will be independent contractors, I guess franchises awarded by the county. The county is not buying a boat or multiple boats. They're not buying a boat and leasing it back or anything like that. This is going to be, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which is why we're very pleased that some entities have already reached out to us and asked, can we get involved?
So this idea of a foot ferry to Anacortes, and then will it just like a lollipop? Will it go around all of the individual islands, the 4 islands?
That's what we envisage, and that was what was built into the proposal. Yeah.
Where will that land? Where will that boat land?
It's a good question. Those are some of the details we still have to work out. There's a couple of options on the Anacortes end. It would depend on where the boat originates in Anacortes. We'd want to be thinking about optimal connectivity to, say, Skagit Transit, or to locations where people could park their cars, right, and have them based there. So we have to look at some of those logistics with the assistance of an entity that would apply to, or submit a proposal to the county to stand up such a service. So on the Anacortes end, there's a couple of different options. When it comes to our islands, our options are more limited, as you know. In the case of Lopez, what Tom Bridge was doing was landing at Odland Park. In the case of Friday Harbor, he was landing there. That has a lot more flexibility. And in the case of Orcas, he was landing at the Orcas landing at a dock that Public Works runs. And then for Shaw, again, there's a small dock there. We need to look at the feasibility of having a vessel land there and dropping people off or picking people up. But that's kind of the constellation we're contemplating right now.
And I think you mentioned that you would be coordinating with Skagit County Transit so that buses might be in alignment with arrivals, things like that. I mean, these will be people getting off by foot. Am I thinking of this wrong? Am I thinking about it more about people? Will it also be for visitors who want to come to the islands and would be definitely coming by foot anyway? Is that the other half of this?
Absolutely, yeah. And in terms of, no, there's no question that these emergency funds are meant to be used for people who live here full-time, part-time, people who want to visit, so tourists. So as you can appreciate, there's a lot of communications that will need to be built into this. We do have plans to hire someone to, and that money was built into the emergency fundings, was to be able to hire an individual who can help orchestrate this with the county organization. But the idea is that the service be there for people to utilize, whether they live here or not. So in terms of hooking up with Skagit Transit, I mean, I have to be clear, I have contacts with Skagit Transit, but we can't obviously manipulate their schedule, right? So we would need to try and figure out what might synchronize with, any Skagit Transit, say, bus service that lands at, the location where a passenger ferry would land. Now, because we all know that Skagit Transit is not connected to the ferry schedule of Washington State Ferries, right? And people complain about that. So we've got to think about how we can be creative in this. And so there are a lot of details we'll need to iron out in the next couple of months.
And then there's a third service that's being developed, and that is barges. Tell us about that.
Right. So, and again, this has been in conversation with the community water taxi folks who are pretty familiar with the reliance on barges that and ferries that essential services have, that like public works, for example, but also utilities, be it sanitation, be it electricity in the form of Opalco, but then also contractors and how dependent they are on moving between islands to provide their services. And so there are many barges in this area. I understand the majority of them are largely based in Anacortes right now. But what we want to stand up is a barge service that can assist entities that need to move and haul goods between the islands to be able to provide, essential service or conduct commerce. So that is another leg of the stool we need to lean into and figure out, are we contracting an entity or two that can provide barge services year round that would be interested in looping into this and being an on-call service that can be nimble and flexible. So it's complicated, but certainly it was conceptualized in the proposal, and it's what we need to piece apart now.
So to recap, the inter-island water taxi type of service would only stand up when there was a problem with the WSF inter-island service. It would not run in tandem. But the Anacortes foot ferry would run up to 7 days a week. I guess that detail is, but that will run even when WSF is running. So it'll be in tandem, I guess, a little different from that service. So it's not completely redundant. And then the barge service is kind of in between. It'll at least be available during WSF outages, but perhaps something else too. Some other conditions might be met.
Perhaps.
Is that accurate?
That is, and and given the early stage of planning that we're in, that's as accurate as I can portray it at this time. Okay.
I'm asked from time to time, certain people, since there's going to be so much money available, and I'm sure you've heard about $10 million worth of ideas for this $1.5 million that you have. But one of those maybe in that category is why don't we use that money to cause the school districts to pay a lot less to move their school buses around? Have you been approached with that idea?
I haven't been approached with that idea, to be honest with you, yet at this point. I mean, now that
sorry, I just added another. Sorry about that.
Maybe it will be. So here's the thing I want to share with you. I recently attended the Islands Trust Council meeting, their December quarterly meeting in Victoria, BC. The Islands Trust Council is a council made up of all of the island trusts that exist on the Gulf Islands they are actually elected bodies, and they are not local governments the way we are, but they are responsible for land use planning in the Gulf Islands. And San Juan County has a long-standing relationship with Islands Trust Council that goes back to the late 1990s. We actually have an agreement that goes back to 2007 between the Islands Trust Council and San Juan County to work cooperatively on issues of mutual interest. So I had the opportunity to go there to attend their meeting in person a couple weeks ago on December 5th. And one of the things we talked about in our discussions, it's obviously of mutual interest, is ferries, right? Well, one of the things I was interested in hearing about from them is what kind of private or publicly supported foot ferry service they have in the different islands that augments BC Ferries service. And wow, they have a lot going on, no question. And one of the things that they have is a water taxi that's specifically for school kids. And I was blown away when I heard that. But there were a couple of Islands Trust Council members or trustees who were in the meeting who said, oh yeah, like my kids take the ferry to school on X island. And so I thought, well, now that is a very novel idea. And maybe, now I want to say, Department of Commerce, when we met with them first, they wanted to make sure that we were aware that they are open to innovative ideas that may emerge in the use of these emergency funds. So it's within the realm of possibility that we could stand up some kind of ferry service for school kids. Now, I'm not going to let a water school bus.
Exactly.
That's exactly
yellow with the little stop sign. That'd be funny. That'd
There
be
you
great.
go. Now, as long as no Lopez kids get on it and go to Friday Harbor School or Spring Street and take themselves out of our school, but it was fascinating. So there's a tremendous amount for us to learn from the Islands Trust Council and the experiences of all those islands with different foot passenger services.
How did you happen to get from Lopez to Victoria?
I was originally going to drive, but I had just had foot surgery recently, so my foot was not fully functioning yet, and it was my right foot, my foot with which I pressed the pedal on the car. So in the end, and also what I'd hoped to do is drive up and over, and it would have taken obviously a full day and then an overnight. In the end, I was able to fly, and so I took San Juan Airlines.
Good.
And the only reason that was possible was we hadn't fully expended all of our council travel budget yet by the end of the fiscal. So there was still a little bit of money left over for me to fly. But I swear, every amount of money that was spent to get me over there was worth it in the rebuilding of that relationship. So I'm excited to see that relationship grow further in the coming years, especially with the new council coming together. And Cindy Wolf, by the way, did participate remotely, which was fantastic because she was a valuable resource in the conversations we had.
San Juan Airlines, hometown airline.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Way to go. Way to
I was
go.
going to hope to do Harbor Air and drive down to Seattle and go that way, but the fog wouldn't allow for it. It would have been cheaper, but I wasn't able to do it.
Well, I just want to point out there's a lot of money that is going into studying the economic impact of ferries, of Washington State Ferries, and when there are problems with Washington State Ferries. There are all kinds of studies that have been done and are being done, and they're important. But I think going back to the success that the county council had this year with the governor in this very unusual situation, I think it's important for us to realize that with that $1.5 million, we're doing the kinds of things that maybe would have been done as a result of the studies, and that those studies are not really going to be available for one of them pretty soon, and another one probably another year. And so one of the successes here is that we're getting a big jump start, a big head start on the experimentation and the trial and error and lessons learned. And I think that's just that we shouldn't forget that. We shouldn't overlook that. So, thank you. Thank you for making this happen. And there's still a lot of work to do. Tell us when you think that we actually may see some of these services come into existence.
Well, what was discussed when we were talking about this in the recent county council meeting is late winter, early spring is when we would hope to be standing up some service. So, I think just as we're beginning to head into what is the beginnings of the busy season is when we're going to be able to get some piloting going on. And as you say, that passenger-only ferry study that was funded by the legislature this past session in the beginning of the year, they're hoping, I think, to have some final findings maybe later next year. And they're actually going to be benefiting from a lot of the local data that was put together by Community Water Taxi, by Transition Lopez, and even by our own county government that gathered data and evidence to demonstrate the need for some passenger-only ferry service. And so we're going to feed them that with that data, and then at the same time, we're going to be sharing with them and the governor's office for the incoming governor, and with WSDOT and WSF the findings of our live piloting, and that is really exciting. So they can continue doing their studying, but we're going to be trialing further on the ground simultaneously.
Shout out to Ed Andrews for he was really the engine behind that study, and it is if people haven't had a chance to look at that study, we'll put a link up with this video so that you can look at it. It was extremely professional and a lot of really interesting insights in terms of the price point.
Yep.
He found they found CWT found that there is a potential copay. There is a certain amount of money that people would pay
Right.
but many of them just can't swing $40. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
and times of day and the different purposes. It's just a great study. And thank you, Ed Andrews, for all of that incredible work. So and thank you. So that's the victory lap on the ferries. I think it's also important to note that nobody is declaring victory. This is not over.
Oh
The
no.
problems are not over. We don't
Mhm.
have any more new boats, new vessels. Um, I think most people agree that the staffing is getting better. I think we saw a lot of information at the November 16th Fix Our Ferries Summit, which we live streamed from
Mhm.
Mukilteo. A lot of good news about staffing and recruiting successes, mates,
Yep.
captains, people on the captain's track, even, well, I don't know about engineers, but um, but we're not out of the woods, and who knows what next summer will be like. We're
Exactly.
probably one crew or one boat away from another series of disastrous weekends, and we did have this little reminder this past weekend. Um, so I guess the last thing I want to talk about with the ferries is, are we going to be the county going to be lobbying intensely in Olympia with the new session? The biennial session starts, I guess, in about 3 weeks. Um, are we asking for things? Are we demanding? Do we have lobbyists working on this?
Absolutely. We have our county lobbyist, Josh Weiss, who is also the lobbyist of actually all other four Swiss county partners, which is fantastic. I mean, the synchronicity is really valuable that he can function with in terms of knowing what all our needs are and how they're interrelated. So it's wonderful to have a lobbyist down there. We will also have lobbyists in the forms of myself, and members of our Ferry Advisory Committee, members of the Ferry Lovers of Washington group based in Friday Harbor, residents who want to participate in a lobbying effort. So indeed, we will be having, we'll have a day on, it'll be a couple of days at the Capitol on the Hill, in the week of February 3rd, I believe it is, when it'll be a Fix Our Ferries kind of lobbying summit down there, which is going to be fantastic. And we're going to try and push out information both through the county as an organization, but also through our FAC as to how people could show up for that if they wanted to, or write in to legislators. But our fundamental ask, I think, is going to be based on what I learned today in our Ferry Advisory Committee, that it was attended by John Facina, the Senior Director for Customer Relations and Planning and Government Relations, is that the governor included in his budget, and we can thank him for this as well, he included in his budget longer-term funding for that extra crew or third watch on the inter-island route to make it permanent, so that it's running 7 days a week throughout the year, throughout the winter season, but also to adjust our schedule to make it a 2-season schedule. And what that would do is make it more desirable for WSF staff and crew to be based up here, providing more reliable and stable crewing and staffing for our route. So the governor heard us loud and clear. I mean, his budget was just released, and those monies are already inserted in that budget and earmarked for those things. So we need to come in behind and lobby the relevant legislators in the Senate and the House to try and ensure that what he has earmarked stays in the transportation budget. And that will not be an easy task because, as we all know, the state is pretty stretched for funds right now. These are lean days, and there was just a freeze that the governor announced in any discretionary spending of any kind for contracts or goods or services. So these are lean times, and but we will be there speaking loudly with the whole Fix Our Ferries coalition across the system, North and South Sound. So we now have partners in this effort as well.
And that's another thing that we didn't have a year ago that we have now. We have some serious allies from Vashon, from Bremerton, and I think that coalition is going to grow thanks to a lady named Amy Dreyer,
Yep.
who is a dynamo, has a ball of energy. She's a skilled communicator and a skilled organizer. And so we are not out there alone anymore.
No.
We're not screaming in the, in the wilderness. We've got some serious allies, and they bring their own relationships with their own legislators and their own senators. So we will not be ignored quite as easily, I think, in Olympia, and that's really important. That's really important. And finally, you're going to be talking today, I think, with a person who's really caught my attention, Greg Nance, who's a representative from Bainbridge Island. And this guy is kind of amazing. He's creative and he's energetic, and he's interested in hearing from a county council member from the San Juans, right? I mean, he's like your representative. I mean, he's just looking kind of globally at the whole Puget Sound area and everybody that depends on Washington State Ferries. So we're really in significantly better shape, even if it doesn't always feel like it on the front line, for the customers. We are really in better shape than we were even 6 months ago.
I agree 100%. And I will be talking to him this afternoon. I'm trying to get a read on what are the things that he wants to float in this legislative session. How can we support him in any bills he wants to advance? So I have to say, my takeaway, one of my biggest takeaways from going to that meeting in Mukilteo, sort of our legislative summit of Fix Our Ferries in Mukilteo, was that we're well respected for the advocacy we've been doing for ourselves, and we want to work together and share lessons in our joint advocacy. And so Representative Nance was with us the whole day. He spent an entire day with us, listening, taking information in, sharing his feedback and his thoughts. And it was he like you say, he's quite a dynamo. And I discovered he's an ultra marathoner, and that totally makes sense with his personality.
It is worth noting there were there was a very powerful, very important senator who we were, lucky to have there, and then three representatives, and everybody else went at lunchtime, but Representative Nance stayed all the way to the end.
Yeah.
In the planning session and all that was pretty impressive. So anyway, enough of that. We could obviously keep going, right? We could just keep talking about ferries, but
Jeff,
let's talk.
Can I just add one thing onto this, though?
Sure.
Because I think it's a really important aspect of all of this, and it'll touch on where we're pivoting in terms of what's, looking ahead. But you touched on something in terms of where our boat's going to land, right? Well, then there's a problem of how do you move once you get there, right? And so I just want to make really clear that is indeed a challenge our county organization needs to lean into, is how do we look at supporting, say, some EV transit on islands where you don't just come up to Friday Harbor and then walk off and in the town and make your way to wherever else you want to go on the island, which sometimes has more options than it does on other islands. But we need, as an organization, as we update our comprehensive plan this year, to think about how do we make sure that we've got on-island transportation that is going to work for our public. And I don't know if you knew this, and I don't know if I shared it with you, but Lopez Transition, or Transition Lopez, a local organization on Lopez Island that is doing things as a volunteer civic organization to look at how fossil-free emissions can be reduced by 2030. They have a transportation work group, and they also did a survey of over 1,000 people who traveled to Lopez Island, either part-timers, full-timers, visitors, to find out what appetite there was for EV shuttle service on Lopez Island, from the ferry terminal to different locations on the island. And there is a remarkable amount of interest in EV shuttle service on Lopez. And Jeff, I'm happy to share that study with you if you'd like, but I really, hats off to that local group for doing that work.
That's another thing too about the ferries and the way we're seen around the state and Western Washington. It's not just that we have been advocating loudly, but we've been innovating. And, tip of the hat to another person, Tom Bridge, who through the winter, the worst weather, in that little boat that's not enclosed, and he has moved 750. I don't even know what the number is anymore. Yeah. It's got to be approaching 1,000 different trips that got people with their jobs, that got people to medical appointments, that got jurors to trials that would have been, I guess, hampered without a jury,
Yep.
and so many, and now this whole thing. So we don't have just a reputation for advocacy, successful advocacy, but we also have a reputation for innovation. And then that comes back to the quote island way, innovation, resourcefulness, and all that. So it's just very proud. Okay, we have to stop because we want to talk about a couple other things. But obviously, State of the Union, state of the ferry situation, significantly better than it was this summer, and in some ways that are not obvious yet, significantly better than it was a year ago.